to the museum, come to these too. So.
Well, thank you for coming. We love it when you come.
Thank you, Jayshree. You're our only hostess who provides coffee.
Yes, please, help us out.
Okay. I'm Brad Worthen, and this is the noon debrief. It's a production of the Confederate Reliquary and Military Museum. And we've been having these because the education room at the museum was kind of busy being remodeled and stuff, for about a year. And it's about to reopen. We'll keep doing these. We really appreciated the library for hosting us over the summer. We've had a couple of really good programs. And we've also had quite a number of those at Richmond Library. Afterwards, when this is over, I'll have free passes for anybody who'd like a free pass to go to the relic room. If you haven't checked it out, even if you have, we'll give you a free pass to come again. And our next noon debrief after this one, just to get ahead of myself, is scheduled to be at the Richmond Library on the 26th of this month. The speaker is Kim Stacy, who spoke here in the summer. He spoke about the Battle of Camden. He's going to talk about a day in the life of a typical Revolutionary War soldier on both sides. And that promises to be very nice, but I mentioned something a moment ago about some of our programs this fall are in doubt. He had a fall yesterday night and injured his shoulder, and I haven't heard back from him. When I called, he was at the hospital. And so I don't know if that's going to interfere with his ability to do this or not. I need to talk to him about that. But that's the plan right now. After today, if you served in the U.S. military, particularly in the Army or the Marines, you are very familiar with the M16. But I think even you, and especially civilians, will learn a great deal from Ben Battiste's program today. Ben is a combat veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan, and where he carried an M4, which is the cut down version of this. It's even shorter, Jayshree, than this one. Then later at Fort Jackson, he was an instructor in both the M4 and the M16, and knows a lot about it, which he's going to share with you. He's going to do everything but have target practice with you. He's even
it'd be even better if I had a real one so I could disassemble it and talk about the assemblies.
A couple of verses.
Yeah.
Just 3 rounds.
Yeah, just let everybody know what we're talking about.
But that's the accurate weight, right?
Yep, that right there is the accurate weight.
Okay. I want to ask you all, if you haven't, I think most of them haven't done it already, but please leave us your name and email address, because we're constantly updating our schedule of future programs, and we want to keep people in touch. Just you should welcome Ben.
Well, thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the history of the M16 rifle platform, from its origins in the mid-20th century all the way to where the platform is today and how it's used. We're also going to be covering the why of its development, what problems and was it answering to, what was it a solution to, as well as, technical changes, how it was used in the battlefield and that kind of thing. All right, so before we can really talk about the M16, I think we need to talk about its predecessor, the M14. So the M14 was originally developed in the late 1950s. It didn't have a very long service life before it was replaced with the 16. But this was built to be sort of a good all-battle rifle. It was intended to replace the M1, plus the carbine, the M3 grease gun, and even the bar. Like I said, it's supposed to be this covers every base type weapon. It fired a new type of round that was developed for it, which was the 7.62 by 51 millimeter NATO round, and this weapon offered excellent range, stopping power, accuracy. This was like the rifle to end all rifles. So it maintained a lot of this features and design of the M1, so it was a very familiar weapon when they handed it to soldiers to train on, and that helped them onboard the M14, and there wasn't a big learning curve to pick this weapon up. It did have some flaws, though. So it weighed over 10 pounds when it was loaded, and it was 44 inches long, which in the traditional European battlefield, that's not such a problem. Once you're looking at fighting in Southeast Asia in the jungles, all of a sudden that length becomes a liability. It was capable of full auto. Like I said, it's supposed to cover the grease gun and the bar, so it's a full auto weapon. But with the stopping power and the muzzle velocity of the ammo that we were using at 7.62, it was an uncontrollable weapon to use on automatic. So its strength all of a sudden became its weakness with that. So we had to look at trying to get something that could have that automatic fire to provide support by fire and suppressive fire. And we needed to prioritize something that would help with the new fields of battle that we were fighting in that required small unit, rapid engagement type warfare rather than the traditional warfare of units meeting in the field. So the other thing that helped change our ideas of what the modern battle rifle needed to be was the counterpart to the M14, which was the AK-47. So the AK-47 has a reputation well earned of being a very rugged weapon. It worked well in the jungles. It handled moisture, mud, dirt, all of that stuff just fine. But it was also everything that the M14 wasn't. It was shorter, it was lighter, it was simple to use. It used a smaller caliber. It's a 7.62 still, but a 39 millimeter round. And so it had less punch, but it was much easier to control in the automatic fire. So that was something that we had to then take back to the drawing board. How do we answer this new threat when they can not reach out with ranges, but again, we're fighting in the jungle. The range, no longer an issue. And so the range isn't an issue, and we can't be accurate with rapid fire on this thing. So that was one of the reasons we had to look at developing something new. Also, the AK was famous for its banana-style magazine that held 30 rounds, which all of a sudden we're worrying about magazine capacity and what the enemy can bring to bear versus what a soldier can bring to bear out in the jungles of Vietnam. And so we needed to have something else. And it was these problems that kind of planted the seed for what would become the M16 family of weapons. So the AR-15, designed by Eugene Stoner, the Armalite AR-15, was to be the answer to these problems. It was an innovative rifle that prioritized weight reduction, controllability, and ease of production. So instead of using the heavy steels and woods of the M14, this used aluminum and composite materials. Although those composite materials would have this lovingly known as, the toy gun, the Mattel gun, because some of that composite was being supposedly made by Mattel because they had the plastic production facilities to produce that kind of thing. It used a direct gas impingement system, which was something different. And this also helped reduce the weight of a weapon, and it would reduce weight over the AK-47, which has a gas piston-driven system. So it's a reduced weight, ease of manufacture, and also reduces recoil. Everything they were looking for in this new rifle. It was also designed to use a new high-velocity 5.56 45 millimeter cartridge designed to tumble and yaw, causing significant tissue damage. So the original rounds developed for this were, instead of just reaching out and hitting something really hard, it was having a yaw tumble to it, so an end-over-end tumble. And that tumble, to hit a target, the round wasn't hitting dead on. It would be at better angle, or when it hits something, it still has that kinetic energy spinning, and that would send it bouncing through the body, which would cause very lethal wounds. This is going to change as the weapon continues developing, but this is what it was designed to do initially. So at first, the U.S. military showed little interest in moving over to this. The Army was committed to the M14, and the AR-15 seemed too radical of a departure from what the Army had been doing with the M1 through the M14. They were very stuck on this idea of these very robust, heavy weapons. But it was the Air Force under General Curtis LeMay who saw the potential in this weapon and having something lighter weight, and he adopted it for base security forces. Maybe not out in the field, but base security, yeah, we can have something a little smaller caliber that would be used for security. And it was from that adoption that it was started getting picked up by special forces and those kind of organizations who were going over there who needed what the AR-15 had to offer. So, and they were saying at the time when Special Forces was using it that it was outperforming the M14 in jungle combat scenarios because of its lighter weight, its less recoil, higher ammo capacity, and controlled auto fire. So it was with this opening of the door that allowed the U.S. military to finally look at adopting this, and they redesignated the AR-15 as the M16. So as we mentioned, it was designed to be fired with a specific round. So the M193, the original 5.56 round for this, it was a 55 grain high velocity round, and it was lightweight, controllable, and one thing, fragmentation was to help cause greater wounds. Part of why we were also looking at going to a smaller round beyond the controllability of the weapon was it would allow the service member, when they're carrying their ammo, to have as much, more ammo for the same weight, or save on weight and carry a similar amount of ammo they were carrying for their M14s. So with the weapon having a 20-inch barrel, which was designed with rifling with a 1 in 12 twist. So what that means is you had one twist of the barrel every 12 inches down it. So 20 inches, so you have almost 2 full twists. That was what this bullet was designed to fire down. And with that, it had a muzzle velocity that could sometimes break the bullet once it came out, allowing fragmentation. Or, if not that, you had that yaw tumble I mentioned earlier. So it gave up a little, the idea was it gave up a little lethality, though, in that fragmentation in the yaw, because we knew it wouldn't have the punch that other more powerful rounds would. But when hitting light targets, this was seen as an acceptable trade-off. And eventually that's something that the military would change their mind about, and we will get to that as the scenario develops. So the early M16 fielding was a fiasco in Vietnam. So these started being issued to soldiers, and the rollout was handled in a way only the military could roll something out. So the original rounds that was designed for used a different grain than what the soldiers were issued. The original grain that was supposed to be fired out of the AR-15 that it was developed for was a long rod grain that burned clean. It was found that supply chain just couldn't produce enough of that kind of powder to actually supply the U.S. military, so they did the best that they could with what they had, and they developed a new grain that had similar ballistic characteristics and provided the same muzzle velocity to the round. It was round, it was easy to produce, but it was very calcium rich, and that caused lots of additional gummage of the system by carbon blowback, especially when we had that direct impingement system that we just talked about. While there are some great reasons to use a direct gas blowback, one of the problems with that is you're taking that gas directly from the shot and letting it right back into the rifle to blow the bolt back, and that allows all of that dirt and carbon to come with it. And that was one of the things that really caused initial issues. So what we had was originally a weapon that fired very clean. Now we're using rounds that fire very dirty. Not all the soldiers and leadership were briefed on it. They had heard very clean round. This is something you don't have to clean. They tell their soldiers, this is what you don't have to clean it. It's self-cleaning. It was anything but self-cleaning. And so it was just a lot of training issues that led to an initial really bad reception of the M16. It got over there and it was very jam prone. It hit the jungles and it was prone to rupting. It was prone to the carbon buildup we were just talking about. There were magazine failures due to the springs in the magazines not being tight enough to push the rounds in. And there was just a lot of failure to feed new rounds into the weapon. So a lot of service members were then requesting to get their M14s back because it might be heavier and harder to lug around, but at least it was reliable, which in this environment the M16 wasn't. So this loss of confidence. The core design the military thought was still a sound idea. So in response to this, they pulled back the M16s, and this is where we get the M16A1. It's the first big change that happens to the M16. The big changes that we see in the M16A1, which we've got one right here, is one of the things that you see is the forward assist. So this was added. It's dubious whether or not this thing actually added any value to the weapon, but when you charge the weapon, you could tap on this and it would push the bolt just a little bit more and help seat the bullet into the chamber. So if you weren't feeding properly, you could give it a little tap and try to get it past any kind of carbon buildup you had. The other big changes were they had realized the corrosion was a big issue, and so they chrome plated the barrel in the chamber, so that way it wasn't as rust prone anymore. And once that issue was taken care of, we started seeing a lot better service record out of the weapon when being used in Southeast Asia. So the initial, okay, we talked about that. So yeah, a big problem was the powder. The stick powder was the IMR 4475, and they changed it over to a dirtier ball powder for the 846 in the mid-1960s. And that was one of the big problems with it. And it wasn't until 1970 when they redid the WC 844 powder that it was a cleaner burning powder. They removed the calcium that was in the powder. And so that also helped improve the legacy of the M16 in 1970 once they changed the powder of what they were issuing out to combat soldiers. So we already talked about the forward assist, the chrome bore better powder. The next big change was the M16A2, which the M16A2 took the same refinements that we had with the A1 and just changed things over from, originally it had a full auto mode, and the powers that be decided that was wasting too many bullets. So the bean counters won this argument, and it was moved to a 3-round burst with every pull of the trigger. And this was to conserve ammo. It also was the first major improvement to the sights. So the M16A2 sights had, on that, the charging handle was hollowed out right there, and there would have been a sight that flipped right here. One was for distance engagement, the other one was for low light engagement. So if you were out and about and could actually take the time to aim, it had a very small aperture, so you could get a really good sight picture and be on target. The other one was a much wider hole, so you could at a glance see through it and kind of get your aim down, but that was not going to help you at range, but definitely helpful in low light. So it also included a heavier barrel, because when the A2 came out, we were also looking at moving over to some different types of rounds, and these rounds had different pressures for based on how the powder burned. So the heavier barrel was added in. Then the M16A3 was essentially the A2, but they just brought back the full auto. It was then decided that maybe having a full auto weapon as a rifle is useful, so they just brought in the same rapid fire that was allowed before. So full auto was added back in. And then when the last variation of the M16 is the M16A4. And what they did with the M16A4 is they made it look much more like the M4s, and they added a full rail setup to it. So you have the modularity to add different sights, lasers, that kind of thing, to be able to compete on a more modern battlefield. So as we evolve past the M16, the next iteration we see is its smaller brother, the M4. So the M4 changes were in continued reactions to, just like the M16, we had to look at having a smaller weapon to fight in the jungles. The M4 was the military adapting to fight in a more urban environment, and also to give some kind of weapon that had stopping power to vehicle crews, where when you're in a vehicle or in buildings, you just really can't have as long of a barrel. So the carbine came out to help address that. It changed the gas system, because to provide the same punch as the M16, they had to change the powder again. And when you change the powder like that, it puts more pressure onto the chamber, more pressure in the barrel, so everything is strengthened. The twist was also changed on this. From a barrel to a 13.5-inch barrel, and it was 12 minutes than the original 1-12 twist. Along with that, it just offered a lighter maneuverable weapon, the flat top upper and quad rail handguards, made it easier to attach. Right here we can see this would pop off. And you have the rail right here, and eventually the heat shield here would be removed, and a new type of heat shield would be put on that has additional rails on all four sides. It would allow the additional capacity to have more equipment strapped onto it. And this is the weapon that has taken the U.S. military into the 21st century. So another thing that defines this weapon system is the fact that it is a closed bolt firing system. And what that means is the bolt is forward and chambered when the trigger is pulled. And this has several advantages to it. First, its accuracy, being that when so right here we've got the bolt pushing around the chamber. We gotta stop doing that. So that is fully forward before the weapon fires, and that is going to increase accuracy, because when the bullet is firing in an open bolt system, the bolt would be moving back towards the rear when it fires, and so this gives more stability when you fire. So it has less chance of mechanical disruptions because everything is fully seated when it fires. Open bolts are a little more prone to jamming because of being open when they fire. It's much easier for a bullet to get halfway in there before the bolt tries to fire it. So these are less jam prone. It also keeps the chamber more sealed from dirt and debris, which is in dirty environments. And beneficial when using optics and suppressors, both of which depend on consistent point of impact and gas control. Something that's much harder to achieve on the open bolt weapons. Now, open bolt weapons are what we traditionally use in our machine gun designs, and these are chosen instead of closed bolt systems because they are able to fire at a faster rate than something firing from closed bolt, and they're less prone to heat buildup. So with the M16 M4 family, you're never firing so many rounds that you have to worry so much about heat buildup when you really have long sustained fire. Firing from the open bolt will make sense because it would let the heat dissipate from the weapon by not keeping everything closed and pushing down the barrel. So the original M16 rifles were issued with a straight 20-round magazine. And this was easier to lie prone with in this front here does show you what the size would be of the 20-round magazine in here. So you could definitely down. You didn't have anything pushing the weapon up. So you could have a more limited target base that you were offering to the enemy with something like that. But it also limited the ammo capacity. And as we had mentioned earlier, you saw that part of the reason to develop this was to get as many rounds as the AK-47 had at 30 rounds. And we produce everything to do it and then go back down to 20 rounds. So it's not actually answering the initial problem that we stated that we had. So as there was that continued demand for more ammo, the magazine developed to what is the more traditional shape and size of the AR-15 and 16 family of weapons with a slight curve to the magazine and a capacity from 20 rounds up to 30 rounds. So there were some problems, though, with the upgrade to the new magazines. So these magazines were both initially designed to be a disposable magazine. The idea was the service member was issued magazines, they would fill the magazines with their ammo. When they were done, they would drop it, and they'd put in a new one, they'd leave the other one behind. You could reload them, but that wasn't the idea. It was supposed to be fire and forget, and because of that, they were all made out of aluminum. Well, again, just like we had with the bullets, and we had to worry about supply issues and the cost, it was seen to be cost ineffective to constantly be giving people new magazines all the time. So they were just told, just keep reloading those old magazines. They were aluminum, they would get dented, they would get bent while you were out in the field, and they would stop feeding. So some changes that happened over time was that they moved these over to steel production. And once you had the steel outside, that definitely helped improve the weapon's ability to properly feed by not having damaged magazines. The other thing that was looked at over time was the loader spring, which puts pressure at the bottom and pushes the rounds generally up. And those springs over time have changed in their geometry and in their thickness to provide a stronger and more even pressure of the rounds up into the weapon. All right, so modern enhancements. So the M4A1, just like we had the changes from the M16 to the A1, A2, the M4A1 was the first major update to the M4, and this added full auto support. And had free-floating rails on it, which improved an improved trigger. The trigger took less pressure to squeeze on it. And ongoing changes to the optics. The optics have been developing for the M4 quite a bit over time, and a lot of the changes and new implementations of the M4 have been based on the fact that it was built to be a modular weapon system. So the weapon itself doesn't change much over time. It's the adding of optics. Like this example right here has the ACOG on it, which is a 3.2 magnification scope that you can have on your weapon. We can add things like additional grips to change how you hold it to make it more comfortable for the firer to shoot and more accurate because of that comfort. You can also add things to it such as lasers. That right there is an AR laser, so you use that with your night observation goggles so you can see where you're aiming at night, as well as adding things like surefire flashlights and everything to the front of the weapon. The free-floating rails are what I was talking about before with some of the changes. That would be removing that grip that had originally come, the heat shield. And instead of a heat shield, you have these rails, which are just pinned in place by the squeeze of the release right there for the heat shield release.
And what year was that model?
Everything except for the full auto was introduced back in, Special Forces started using it in the mid-90s. It reached conventional units So the chop down commando AR-15s were a first attempt at making a carbine-style weapon. So the big changes to the M4 was the re-chambering and the new rifle to the barrel, because over time we developed ammunition to try to keep a similar ammunition profile to what the M16 is capable of. And the original commandos were just shortened, so when you have a shorter barrel, you lose muzzle velocity. So they have much less range, much less power than the M16. So when we get the M4, it has been redeveloped to try to get a power much closer to the M16.
Was it 30-round mag standard on that?
Yes, 30-round mag by the time the M4s are being used is a standard across the entire military.
And one more question.
Yes.
How would you carry that?
How would you carry an M4? Yeah, so actually when it comes to these weapons, yes, there's a carrying handle. Nobody carries it with a carrying handle. Any NCO who would see something like that, I don't care, the service is going to freak out. All of these would be carried either at a port arms, you're just carrying your weapon, or they do have, all of them have hooks for putting on your shoulder straps. And shoulder straps had originally just been a strap and you would have it on there. But they developed over time to where you can have 3-point straps, 2-point straps, 1-point straps that all go around the shoulder and then it hangs. And that allows the weapon to hang at a ready weapon position all the time, and then you just have to reach down and grab it. I prefer the 1-point sling myself, but yeah, there's quite a few different sling designs that have been developed, but all of them use a similar hook system. Here, let me see if I can go back. So right here you see there's the hook right there. We've got the sling coming back, and it comes back over here and attaches to the buttstock. And this right here, we can see that right there is the elastic on that sling, and that gives you some of that spring. So this one looks like it's a 1-point. So you'd have the elastic bit that would go around your neck and around your chest, and it would give it a little spring to it. And then the rest of the straps just hold that to the loop. So along with this evolution, the M16's ammo has been evolving over time too. So we talked about the original ammo and the changeover to the round grain, and eventually that fixed itself with the lower calcium. But in the 1980s, as we continued to develop the weapon system, we moved over to a 62 grain NATO standard M855 round. The big change beyond the grain on this was the way the actual bullet was constructed. So instead of having something that was meant to shred, because they found out with that shredding, we knew that that was going to have some loss of lethality. And so in the 1980s, we thought, as we're engaging more heavily armored troops, we need something that can actually punch through, say, a Kevlar helmet or get through light armor. And the answer to that was the 855 round. So instead of having something that could shred and break apart like that, we went over to something that had a soft copper jacket that would fade away, that would peel off as it fired, and then you'd have the steel penetrator. So the issue with the steel penetrator, though, is it goes straight. There's no yaw tumble anymore to this round. And it's great for punching through holes into armor. It's not great when hitting flesh. So once it hits a soft target without that, without any kind of tumble to it or without any breaking apart, it tends to go straight through things. So this is where in the 1980s, soldiers start getting taught that their weapon's not so much a lethal round anymore, it's a wounding round. And the idea is if you wound one person, it's going to take 2 people to carry that guy off of the field. So now you've taken 3 people out of the fight with 1 shot. This is great when you're fighting conventional forces and people are actually have medics taking them off the field. This isn't so great when you're in the middle of a firefight and you are shooting at, say, insurgents or something, and you can't bring them down because the rounds are going straight through their body and just leaving a small hole, and you're just waiting for an hour or two for them to bleed out. When that happens, this is all of a sudden not the greatest round to be using anymore. So some other rounds that were developed that aren't commonly used, they are more of a special allocation depending on the mission, is the Mark 262 and the Mark 318 rounds. So these are higher grains, and they're made for longer range engagements, heavy armor penetration, that kind of thing. The 318 is a short barrel for your carbines and trying to give you some of the same abilities of the 262, but for that smaller barrel. The most recent change has been going over to the A1 of the 855. And we can see here that we have a longer bullet. And one of the big things was environmental. We wanted to get rid of using lead in all of our rounds, so we have nothing but copper in this one. And instead of having a tip that peels off, we have an exposed steel round at this point, and a copper jacket that only goes partially up. So this is supposed to be more consistent, optimized for using with the M4 carbine as opposed to the M16, while still providing similar characteristics to the 855. And it does, although in testing it's shown that it's not really much of an improvement over the 855 because it is a slightly heavier round. And ballistically it doesn't add much, but one thing it does do that has been a hindrance to it, and some people have questioned the adoption of it, is to fire that larger, heavier round, it creates a lot more chamber and barrel pressure when it's fired. And it's actually over the specs of what the M4 is designed to take. So when you fire these rounds, you will notice that the M4 degrades faster, and it's going to have more maintenance issues and eventually wear out. All rifles wear out over time, but this would eventually wear out a weapon 50% faster anyhow.
Then one question before you leave this page. Is there any loss in impact from when you go from a lead plug to a copper?
No, so the plugs at the back are just to give it weight when the gas pressure hits it. So that gives it the weight to push it out, and once the velocity has been absorbed by the actual steel penetrator, all of this back stuff peels away. And that's not anything that's hitting the target. The only thing that's hitting the target with either of these rounds is going to be the steel.
Okay. Then when they talk about a full metal jacket, what are they talking about there?
The full metal jacket is, where that's coming from is from the original 855 and the adoption of that, which you have the entire bullet covered in a copper. And this is to get away from having an exposed lead. Because exposed lead, while great for pistols and stuff and can cause massive wounds on light targets, not great at penetrating things and can sometimes be seen as too damaging for combat use. So to protect that, you would have a full metal jacket around it, and this is still considered a full metal jacket because not only is there no exposed lead, there's no lead.
The SOST, is that an acronym for something?
For the SOST round, it is, and I couldn't tell you what it is because I've never been issued a 262 or a 318. 22 years in, and they're there, but it's something that you would have to be on a very special mission to have issued to you. You know, everything we had ever fired was the 855s and then the 855 A1s. And the A1s definitely, as a marksmanship instructor, have a very different characteristic than the 855s in firing, which we noticed at the rifle qualification courses because those are automated to where it detects when a bullet hits the target. The 855 A1s are moving so fast and penetrate so easily through the kind of targets we have that the hits aren't always detected. So you hit, and it hits so fast and so smooth that targets don't go down. And then soldiers are like, I hit it, and you'll sit there and fire, and you're like, oh, yeah, you are. So, yeah, it's been a problem moving over to the A1s, but it's been pushed because of environmental concerns and supposed to be better ballistics when it comes to armor penetration, which, at least from firing at supposed to be test soft targets, that has been the case, that they're maybe too powerful to do any kind of stopping power to that. So it's a weapon that has been developing for over 60 years. And it was introduced during the Cold War and was tested in the crucibles of Vietnam and has served in every major conflict since, and is only just now, maybe by the military, being replaced by newer weapons. And we'll see if the newer weapons are widespread in acceptance. We've been looking for a replacement to the M4 platform for 20 years now, and everything that's come up has failed to meet every standard the M4 already provides. And it's more than just a tool of war. The entire M16 M4 platform has influenced countless international designs, from the Canadian C7s to the Israeli Tavors and to all of the AR-15 variants that are seen on the civilian markets today. And it's really been a weapon that has withstood the tests of time based on its modularity, its adaptability, and the precision of the weapon. It's still a very precise, very accurate weapon that you can build it to suit your needs, whatever that mission might be. And while new technologies may replace the M16 platform, its legacy is one of the most influential military rifles that military history has ever seen, and it will be secure in the annals of history because of how long it's been used and what kind of questions it's answered on the battlefield. So at this point, I'd like to open it up for any kind of questions anybody has.
I seem to recall there was a grenade launcher attachment that you could put on the early model 16. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So that is a 203 attachment. And this replaced the M79, which was the first 40 millimeter grenade launcher, which was a separate weapon. So the 203 was an underslung component and would be attached to, in combat situations, that would be the grenadier. And it launches a 40 millimeter grenade, which is about yay wide and about this long, stubby thing. And you could engage targets to about 200 meters with that. And those have since been replaced with, because that was a bolt-fed weapon, and the newer ones that they have replaced it with are, instead of cocking open to charge the bolt, is it cocks over to the side now. And the military is starting to get away from underslung grenade launchers at all and moving to a smaller, almost pistol-sized grenade launcher that grenadiers carry, because it just adds too much forward weight and it reduces the accuracy of the M4s, because, again, you're constantly going down with your barrel over time in a firefight. So they're trying to alleviate that and make it a more modular weapon system by having you just pull out a different weapon when it's time to use that different weapon.
But it wasn't designed to replace the M79, was it?
The 203 was designed to replace. The idea was like, why do we have soldiers carrying two weapons when they could just carry one? And the 79s had wooden components on it, and it was a heavier thing to carry than the modern equivalent. Yes?
Then what about bayonets? Still issues? Still being used? What's the deal with that?
They're still in the inventory. I was issued a bayonet and had to carry it with me into Iraq in 2003. So Fallujah, we had them, but last time I was in Afghanistan, 2010, we didn't take them out. It's one of those components that I think has to do with military history and why we still have them. If you look at bayonet development over the years, our bayonets have gotten shorter and shorter because they're used less and less. And there have been recent bayonet charges. And there was bayonet charges. The Australians did a bayonet charge against the Taliban in Afghanistan. They'd run out of ammo, they affixed bayonets and charged, and the Taliban broke. That's a scary thing when people are crazy enough to put a knife on the end of their rifle and charge at you. But yeah, it's not something that's really used anymore.
I served in 68 and 69 my rifle was just like the one you had. We were issued a bayonet, never received any training, never used it.
Right.
I just wondered if they even had an attachment for the bayonet.
Oh yeah. I'll go back to a.
It'd probably be almost like a regular knife by that point, right?
Yeah, they're only about yay long on the blade, and we use them to open our MREs. It's more of a food tool than it has wire cutters on it. You can hook up the blade and cut through some concertina wire if you have to, but yeah, as an actual fighting tool, no, I don't think anybody would trust that. We all carried other hand-to-hand fighting implements with us when we went into battle, we just didn't trust the bayonets. And there's a whole history of the current bayonet that we could get into. Maybe that'll be my next class, is the development of the current bayonet and how it got designed and why it is the way it is. But yeah, even here on a very modern M4, right there, you can see the bayonet lug right by the Surefire. So if you look at the graphic right there, they still clip on there. We can still have them. It's just not an effective weapon.
And you have
Yeah.
any idea how many M16s were manufactured during their run?
They're still being manufactured, so I could hazard a guess, but I mean, we still, based on mission, just like the M14 is still actively being produced. It was mothballed for quite some time, but in Afghanistan, we found that maybe there was a reason to have a rifle that could reach out and hit at very long range, because when you're in the mountains, distances become a little more vague because it's hard to have references with all of the elevation changes. And even with something like this size with a 20-inch barrel, you're not going to be able to reach out 800 to a kilometer away, 800 meters to a kilometer away and hit a target. So to bridge the gap between somebody having a sniper rifle and somebody having an M4, we brought back the 14s. All the wood has been removed from them now to reduce weight, and that's gone to a composite, but it's the same chamber, same barrel, and same stopping power as the M14. And so platoons would have 2 designated marksmen who would be handed the M14 instead of a 16. So you could engage at longer ranges.
How important
Yes.
is the ejection port cover in a sandy, dirty environment?
It's amazingly important when you're in these kind of environments. Anything you can do to keep out any kind of dirt, moisture with your weapon is a precaution you need to take when you're in these kind of situations. And it's not just moist environments like the jungles. When you're keeping your weapon properly lubricated and everything, it's all oiled up. When you're in a sandy environment too, that sand just sticks right to the oil. So you got to make sure everything stays closed up. And yeah, it'll pop open when you're firing, but when you're done, you need to close that back up to.
So how wet do you run your weapon in a desert environment versus some other environment?
In the desert environment, you really want to keep it oiled to the minimum. You want to ensure smooth operation, but nothing beyond that, because it's just too easy to get a sludge built up in there of oil and sand. When you're in a more wet environment, you can be more liberal with the application of your oil, because you're just trying to protect from moisture at that point. And so more oil just means longer protection before it wears away. Alan, I got to get to your question.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
When did they first, the original M16s first in quantity hit Vietnam?
They started hitting in quantity in as early as 1960. There was thousands of them going over there.
1960.
Yeah. So by 1960, because Special Forces had really grabbed onto it at that point, a good portion of them, them.
When did
The regular line, there was still a mix through 62, 64, depending on the unit. These are slow rollout things. Like when I came in 2000, us in the 82nd, we all had M4s. We were one of the only units in the military that had M4s like that. Everybody else was still firing M16s. So it's just when there's money to replace it. So it wasn't a flip a switch and Here's everybody's M16s. It was when the unit got it.
And the rounds all stay 5.62 millimeters?
Yeah, it stayed 5.56, and although the actual bullet size has changed, and that's another thing that's caused problems with the magazines, is there's not the same standoff between the bullets based on how they've changed and what grain's been in them.
Am I off on this, or were there 9 millimeter ones made for a while? No?
And it can be chambered. The AR-15 can be chambered for 9 millimeter, but we don't use a 9 millimeter chamber.
I mean, smaller ones too, or pistol? No.
I mean, yeah, once you're at that point, you're just carrying a 9 millimeter pistol. All right, did I have any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much.